The wind on Long Island Sound has a way of carrying voices. Sometimes it's a gull's scream or the low churn of a distant tug. Sometimes it's the echo of human stories, the kind that seep into a place over generations. At Greensledge Lighthouse, a cast-iron tower built in 1902 and balanced like a chess piece on a rock ledge, those stories were once the practical murmurs of Coast Guard keepers, weather reports, lamp checks, the scratch of pencil on logbook. Now, on certain nights, they're replaced by the laughter of guests who have paid thousands of dollars to spend the night in what was once a government-owned aid to navigation. Greensledge isn't alone. Across the United States, from New England's ragged coast to the far-flung Pacific, lighthouses that once belonged to the federal government are being transferred to non-profits, towns, and sometimes private individuals. The sales are part of a conscious decision by Congress to ensure these historic structures survive, even if they're no longer manned or essential for modern shipping. At the heart of this shift is the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act of 2000, a law that quietly but profoundly reshaped the fate of America's coastal sentinels. By the late 20th century, America's lighthouses were in a strange limbo. Automation had replaced human keepers, GPS and electronic navigation had diminished the need for physical beacons, and many lights stood empty. The Coast Guard, responsible for navigation aids, found itself maintaining buildings that no longer had an active role in maritime safety, but carried undeniable cultural and historical value. Congress recognized both the cost burden and the risk. Without intervention, these symbols could fall into ruin. In 2000, the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act was signed into law. Its purpose was clear: preserve historic lighthouses by transferring them from federal ownership to stewards who would protect and maintain them. The process, in broad strokes, worked like this. First offer: eligible government agencies, non-profits, or educational organizations could apply to receive a surplus lighthouse for free, provided they had the means to restore and preserve it for public benefit. If no qualified takers, the lighthouse would be sold at public auction, often to private individuals willing to shoulder the cost. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was a lifeline. It meant that instead of crumbling in obscurity, these structures could have a second life, whether as museums, bed and breakfasts, cultural centres, or private retreats. Greensledge Lighthouse, perched off Norwalk, Connecticut, was already deteriorating by the time it was declared surplus. Its iron skin was pitted with rust, the paint flaking in sheets, windows cracked or missing entirely. When the Greensledge Light Preservation Society took it on, the goal was ambitious: raise millions to restore it and open it for public tours. And to fund that work, offer exclusive overnight stays. The restoration was a feat. Contractors and volunteers ferried supplies by boat, stripping decades of corrosion, reinforcing floors, and restoring the lantern room to its 1902 elegance. Today, visitors climb its narrow spiral stairs to find restored keepers' quarters, panoramic views of Long Island Sound, and the peculiar thrill of sleeping in a place where history lingers like the salt in the air. The overnight experience isn't cheap. Rates have reached over $3,000 a night. But the demand is proof that people will pay dearly for the romance of isolation and history. And that money fuels the ongoing preservation work. If Greensledge is polished elegance, Hooper Island Lighthouse in Maryland is a stubborn survival story. Built in 1902 in the Chesapeake Bay, this caisson-style light sits nearly a mile offshore. It was auctioned off in 2022 for around $192,000 to a private buyer with a vision, but also a daunting list of repairs. The challenges are immense. There's no dock, so reaching the lighthouse means anchoring nearby and scrambling up a ladder. Salt water eats away at metal, storms batter its walls, and restoring a structure in the middle of the bay is a logistical puzzle. But for the new owner, the appeal is precisely in that challenge, turning a rusting tower into something alive again. While plans are still in development, Hooper Island's fate will likely blend private enjoyment with community access, much like other lighthouses that have found new owners with both a preservation ethic and personal dreams. Few lighthouse tales match the sheer passion of Graves Light, located at the entrance to Boston Harbor. Dave and Lynn Waller bought it at auction in 2013 for $933,888 and spent far more than that restoring it. They hauled in antique furnishings, restored the massive Fresnel lens, and even rebuilt the interior so it feels like stepping into the early 20th century. Getting materials there required creative solutions, including custom-made boats and winches to hoist supplies up the 40-foot base. Every storm tested the work. Yet, for the Wallers, Graves Light isn't a hotel or a public museum. It's a private retreat, a labour of love that doubles as a preservation triumph. The result is a fully functional, historically faithful lighthouse that also serves as a reminder. Sometimes, private ownership can achieve what government maintenance never could. In Connecticut, Stratford Point Lighthouse offers a different kind of story. Built in 1881, it was eventually automated and surplus. When preservation groups in the town expressed interest, the idea wasn't to turn it into a private residence, but into an arts and cultural centre. Plans have included artist residencies, exhibitions, and public events. The lighthouse grounds, already a scenic destination, are envisioned as a creative hub where the beacon inspires not ships, but art. This reflects one of the quieter truths of the NHLPA transfers. The new life of a lighthouse often mirrors the character of its community. Not every lighthouse transfer ends in luxury or private ownership. Detour Reef Light in Michigan was built in 1931 in the St. Mary's River shipping channel. When it was declared surplus, the Detour Reef Light Preservation Society took on the challenge. Volunteers raised funds, restored the building, and even revived the keeper tradition, offering paying guests the chance to spend a weekend living as lighthouse keepers, complete with maintenance duties. The money supports upkeep, but the real payoff is educational. Visitors leave with a deeper appreciation for the isolation, responsibility, and sheer grit that defined lighthouse life. Some lights, like Presque Isle Lighthouse in Erie, Pennsylvania, stay on shore but still benefit from NHLPA transfers. Built in 1872, it was given to the city, which turned it into a museum. Visitors climb its tower, wander through exhibits, and hear stories of the keepers who lived there for generations. Here, the motivation is civic pride. Erie sees the lighthouse as a cultural asset, a link to its maritime history, and a tourism draw. The NHLPA made it possible for local government to invest in preservation without shouldering the acquisition cost. Ask a lighthouse buyer why they did it, and you'll rarely get a short answer. Some will smile and talk about childhood summers by the shore. Others will recount an impulse bid at an online auction, made after a glass of wine. Many will pause, look out toward the horizon, and simply say, "Because it called to me." For some, it's about protecting a tangible link to the past. Lighthouses are among the few surviving pieces of early maritime infrastructure, built to last, yes, but also built for a specific romantic purpose, to keep strangers safe. For history lovers, that mission gives each brick, rivet and beam a moral weight. Take the volunteers at Detour Reef Light. Many of them had never been to the lighthouse before joining the Preservation Society. But when they learned it was one of the last of its kind, a 1931 offshore light with a fully intact keeper's interior, they saw themselves as stewards of something bigger than any one person. They didn't buy a building, they say. They inherited a legacy. Owning a lighthouse is rarely convenient. Some can only be reached at certain tides, Others require you to ferry groceries across open water or climb a ladder in a gale. For certain personalities, that's not a deterrent. It's the point. When Dave and Lynn Waller bought Graves Light in Boston Harbor, they knew they'd face storms, isolation, and saltwater corrosion. But the thought of wrestling those challenges and winning was irresistible. The project wasn't just restoration, it was an adventure in logistics, craftsmanship, and persistence. "I guess we like hard problems," Lynn said in an interview. "If you're going to put your heart into something, it should be something worth sweating for." Lighthouses occupy a peculiar place in the imagination. They're symbols of solitude, constancy, and hope. They're where novels open and where films end. For some buyers, stepping into a lighthouse is stepping into a lifelong fantasy. At Green's Ledge, part of the allure for overnight guests is exactly this: the feeling that they've slipped into a storybook. For the Preservation Society's founders, offering that experience wasn't just a fundraiser, it was a way to connect people to a shared dream. Not everyone who takes on a lighthouse does so for personal use. In towns like Erie, Pennsylvania, or Stratford, Connecticut, the motivation comes from civic pride and a desire to give the public a place to gather, learn, and enjoy. When plans emerged to turn Stratford Point Lighthouse into an arts and cultural space, it wasn't because it was the cheapest venue in town. It certainly wasn't. It was because the lighthouse was already part of the town's identity. Preserving it as a living, creative space made that identity visible and accessible to everyone. While the NHLPA prevents outright profiteering in the free transfer stage, privately purchased lighthouses can be developed into businesses. Some owners see them as one-of-a-kind hospitality ventures, commanding rates that standard B&Bs could only dream of. The owners of Green's Ledge understood this. By offering high-priced luxury overnight stays, they turned exclusivity into a funding engine for preservation. The guests get bragging rights and a unique experience. The lighthouse gets another year of fresh paint and watertight windows. In a few cases, lighthouses have been repurposed as scientific monitoring stations, watching not for ships, but for shifts in climate, water quality, or migratory patterns. These projects often stem from environmental organisations that see lighthouses as ready-made, strategically placed outposts for research. Even when that's not the primary goal, many owners speak of feeling a heightened connection to the natural environment, becoming, in their own way, caretakers of the surrounding waters and wildlife. For some, owning a lighthouse is about leaving something behind. They imagine their grandchildren telling friends, "My grandfather saved that building," or their community saying, "We still have this place because of her." The structure becomes a personal monument, not to vanity, but to perseverance and vision. In the end, the motivations blend. A history lover may become an adventurer. An entrepreneur may turn into a community visionary. What unites them all is a willingness to take on something impractical, difficult, and expensive, and the belief that saving a lighthouse is worth every bit of it. The NHLPA has been a quiet success. Since 2000, over 150 lighthouses have been transferred, many saved from decay. Some are thriving public attractions, others are private dreams realised. In each case, the light remains, not always in service to mariners, but in service to memory, community, and the human love of beacons. America's new lighthouse stewards don't wear the brass buttons or navy caps of the old keepers. They wear work gloves, business suits, or paint-splattered overalls. Some arrive by skiff, others unlock the door from the sidewalk. But they share the same role: to keep the light, whether literal or symbolic, from going out. The National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act didn't just save buildings, it gave individuals and communities a way to step into a centuries-old tradition. Now, from the rocky ledges of New England to the sandy spits of the Great Lakes, That tradition is alive in the hands of a nation of keepers who found their calling not on the high seas, but in the quiet decision to say, "I'll take care of this light."